used to think silence was safety. When I was 9, that word, shh, meant protection, comfort, grown-ups keeping secrets that kids weren't ready for. My mother said it when I cried too loud after falling off my bike. My teachers said it when I talked too much in class. And my uncle said it when I didn't understand why my stomach felt tight and my throat hurt, even though he was smiling. He was my mother's younger brother. Everyone loved him. He'd show up with candies in his jacket pocket and that easy grin people trust without question. I wanted to trust him too. But there was something off about the way he'd look at me when no one was watching. The way his hand would linger too long on my shoulder. The way he'd whisper secrets that didn't feel like secrets at all, more like traps wrapped in kindness. I remember once after dinner when he called me into the kitchen. "Come here, kiddo. I've got a surprise for you." I didn't want to go, but Mom was washing dishes and smiled at me over her shoulder. "Go on, sweetie. He probably brought you one of those chocolate bars you like." He did, and he smiled when I took it. "See? Always looking out for you." But then he leaned close, too close, and my body froze. The kitchen light buzzed above us, yellow and tired. I could smell dish soap and cigarettes. My heart pounded so loud I thought he could hear it. That night, when I tried to tell Mom, I stammered so hard the words barely came out. "Mom, Uncle, he..." She turned to me, drying her hands on a towel, eyes already tired. "Shh, honey. Don't say that. You must have misunderstood. He loves you." And there it was again. That sound. Shh. Like a lid slamming shut on everything I didn't have the language to explain. For years after, that sound haunted me. Every time I tried to speak, it echoed, soft, final, and absolute. I learned that silence could suffocate louder than any scream. By the time I turned 13, I had learned how to smile on cue. Family gatherings became performances. I was the good girl, the sweet niece. I'd help set the table, laugh at jokes, stay close to my mother. But inside, I was always measuring distance, how far I was from him, how close I could get to the door. No one saw the difference. Or maybe they did and chose not to. Sometimes I'd catch my aunt watching me, her smile too tight. But she never said anything. At 14, I started running, literally. Every morning before school, I'd run the track at the park, earbuds in, pretending I was training for something. I wasn't. I just needed to move fast enough to feel like I could outrun my thoughts. That was how I survived those years. Motion over memory. When I finally turned 18, I left home for college 3 states away. I didn't even say goodbye to him. Mom cried at the bus station, hugging me too tight. "Promise you'll call," she said. "I will." I lied. College was freedom wrapped in fear. I loved my classes, but hated the quiet moments, late at night when my roommate slept and I was left with nothing but my thoughts. That's when the flashbacks hit. Not vivid images, just sensations. The smell of dish soap. The buzz of a light. The echo of that word. Shh. I started seeing a counselor during sophomore year. Her name was Dr. Ray. The first time I sat in her office, I stared at a framed quote on her wall. "You can't heal what you don't name." She asked me, "So, what brings you here?" And I said, "I don't know. I just can't breathe sometimes." She nodded like she understood everything I couldn't say. That's when the healing started. Slow, painful, uncertain, but real. When I met Daniel, I didn't tell him anything at first. He was kind, patient, the kind of man who asked before holding your hand. We met at a coffee shop where I worked part-time. He used to come in during his lunch break, always ordering the same thing. Black coffee, 1 sugar, no cream. The first time he smiled at me, my chest tightened. Not with fear this time, but with possibility. It took me months to trust that feeling. Even longer to believe I deserved it. The first time he hugged me, I flinched. He stepped back immediately, hands raised. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah," I lied, just startled. He didn't push, he just nodded. "Take your time." That patience broke something open in me. Slowly, piece by piece, I told him. Not everything, not the details. I couldn't, but enough. When I finished, he said, "You don't ever have to explain more than you want to. You're safe now." Those words meant more than he knew. Still, the past didn't vanish. Some nights a smell or a sound would pull me back. I'd wake up gasping, heart racing, and Daniel would hold my hand until it slowed. "Just breathe," he'd whisper. "You're here. You're safe." I began to believe him. 12 years after I ran, I got the call. My uncle was sick. Cancer. Mom wanted me to come home. "He's family," she said softly. The words made my stomach twist. Family. That word never felt safe to me. For weeks I avoided answering. But therapy had taught me that running forever was just another kind of silence. So, one Friday, I packed a bag and drove 6 hours back to the small town I'd tried to forget. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Mom hugged me like no time had passed. "He's upstairs resting," she said. "He's not the same man anymore." Neither am I thought. When I saw him, he looked frail, almost unrecognizable. For a moment I felt nothing. No hate, no fear, just emptiness. He smiled weakly. "You came." I didn't smile back. "Yeah," I said. "I came to tell you something." He nodded, as if he already knew. "I remember," I said quietly. "I remember what you did, and I'm done carrying it for you." His eyes filled with tears. "I was sick." "Stop." My voice didn't shake. "You don't get to explain. I needed to say it out loud, that's all." I walked out before he could answer. Mom called after me, confused and crying, but I didn't turn back. The silence I carried for years had finally broken. Now, at 25, I live in a small house with Daniel and a dog named Willow. I teach middle school English and volunteer at a local shelter for girls who've been through too much too young. Sometimes when I look at them, I see myself, small, frightened, waiting for someone to listen. I tell them, "You're not what happened to you. You're what you become after." There are still nights when the dreams return, but I've learned that healing isn't forgetting. It's learning how to breathe in the same room as your memories without suffocating. Last week, Mom called. She said my uncle passed away. I felt free. Not happy, not sad, just free. Like the last chain had fallen away. After the call, I went outside and stood in the rain. It felt cold, clean, alive. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I survived. I escaped. I'm still here." And for the first time, silence didn't scare me. It felt like peace. Silence protects no one. Speaking the truth, no matter how painful, breaks the cycle of fear and shame. Healing begins when we stop carrying the guilt that was never ours to bear. Your voice is your freedom. Use it. When I was 12, I spent a summer at my grandmother's countryside inn, the Elm's Rest. It was the kind of place that smelled of cedar, brewed coffee, and thyme. The floors creaked like they carried memories. My grandmother, Evelyn, ran the inn mostly by herself with an old radio for company and a golden retriever named Jasper, who followed her everywhere. It was a quiet place except for the nights. The day I arrived, she hugged me tightly, then leaned down so close I could smell the lavender oil she always wore. "Mara," she said in a low voice, "you can stay anywhere you like, except room 7. Do you hear me?" "Why?" I asked, grinning like the disobedient kid I was. Her hands trembled as she poured me lemonade. "Because some things don't like to be seen." At 12, warnings like that sounded like invitations. But Grandma Evelyn wasn't the kind of woman to scare easily. If her voice shook, something about that room had to be wrong. I still remember how it looked. The last room down the left-hand hall, the wood darker there, the wallpaper more faded. The brass number 7 was tarnished green. Sometimes I'd see the curtains move even when the windows were shut tight. That summer, every guest avoided that door. Sometimes late at night I'd hear faint sounds, like scratching, or whispers slipping between the walls. I'd press my ear to my bedroom door and listen. Then Grandma would start humming an old hymn downstairs as if she was keeping something calm. I never opened that door, but I never forgot it either. 15 years later, I came back. Grandma Evelyn had passed, leaving the inn to me. I was 27, broke, and trying to finish my second book, a mystery novel I hadn't found the ending for. The city had worn me down. The countryside felt like a second chance. When I pulled up the gravel driveway, the house looked almost the same, just a little more tired. Paint peeling, shutters hanging by a nail. But it felt like her, the smell of coffee still clinging to the wood. I walked through the halls, running my fingers over the same wallpaper. When I reached room 7, the door was still there, brass number dulled by time. I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe arrogance. But I unlocked it. The air inside was cool and musty, like a cellar. The room was tidy but old-fashioned, a small bed, a writing desk, lace curtains over a single window. I laughed softly. You scared everyone for this? That night, I decided to sleep there. At first, it was peaceful. The countryside quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a faint scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch against the glass. Then I remembered there were no trees close enough to reach that side of the inn. The sound came again, deliberate, slow, like fingernails dragging over wood. When I looked at the window, I could see my reflection in the glass. Only it wasn't quite my reflection. The face looking back at me was younger, paler. The eyes were hollow and wet-looking, like she'd been crying for years. I backed away and turned on the lamp. The reflection vanished. The scratching stopped. But I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. The air smelled faintly of wet soil, but I told myself it was from the garden outside. I opened my notebook to write, and froze. There, in my handwriting but not my words, were the sentences. Don't let it in. Don't open the window. I laughed, even though it sounded forced. Maybe I'd written them half asleep. Maybe it was a creative spark gone strange. Still, I tore the page out and threw it away. By evening, I heard the murmurs. Low voices, too faint to make out, coming from the direction of the window. The glass vibrated slightly, like something was pressing against it from the other side. I called out, "Hello?" Silence. Then, a whisper so soft it made my skin prickle. "Mara." I stumbled back, knocking over the ink bottle on my desk. Black liquid spread across my notes, dripping onto the floor. When I bent to clean it, I noticed something. Muddy footprints leading from the window to the bed. The window was still shut. For 3 nights, the same thing happened. Scratching, whispers, the faint smell of soil. Each morning, my journal filled with warnings I couldn't remember writing. I started locking the door from the inside. I kept the lights on. I barely ate. Then, on the 4th night, I heard a knock. Not on the door, on the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze in bed, heart pounding. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the cold rattle of the frame. I stepped closer, drawn by something between fear and fascination. My breath fogged the glass. On the other side, I saw her. The child from my reflection. Skin pale as moonlight, eyes black and endless. She was standing in what looked like a corridor made of mist and soil, stretching into darkness. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear her at first. Then the words came through the glass, faint but clear. "I've been waiting for you." The latch clicked on its own. The window swung open, and a gust of freezing air rushed in, carrying the smell of rot and damp earth. I stumbled back, but the curtains blew forward like reaching hands. I remember screaming, then nothing. I woke up on the floor the next morning. The window was closed, frost covering the glass from the inside. My head ached, and the air was heavy with the smell of mud. The innkeeper, the woman I'd hired to help manage the place, was gone. Her car was still in the driveway. Her room looked undisturbed, except for one thing. Muddy footprints leading to room 7, stopping right outside the door. I called the police. They searched the property for days, no trace. They asked if I noticed anything strange. I wanted to tell them everything. The whispers, the writing, the girl. But I didn't. I just said, "Old houses make strange sounds." They left. I sold the inn a month later. Now, years later, I still dream of that corridor. Sometimes, when I wake up, my windows are cold to the touch, and I can hear faint scratching, like something's still trying to get through. I moved into a city apartment on the 10th floor. No trees, no garden, no countryside quiet. But sometimes, when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear a child's whisper through the glass. "You opened the window, Mara. Now we're never alone." Curiosity without caution can invite darkness that never leaves. Some secrets are meant to be respected, not solved. When you ignore the warnings of those who came before you, you risk opening windows that were never meant to be touched. I hadn't been back to my grandfather's farmhouse in nearly 15 years. The drive from Nashville wound through miles of overgrown pasture and rusting barbed wire, the kind of land where the air feels thick with memory. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the house sat there like a ghost that refused to leave. White paint peeling, porch sagging, the windows reflecting the gray Tennessee sky. My mother and Aunt June were already inside, sorting through boxes. I could hear them arguing from the yard. "He kept everything," Aunt June said. "Newspapers from the 60s, receipts from stores that don't exist anymore." Mom sighed. "That's just how he was. Nothing was ever trash to him." When I stepped into the house, the air hit me, a mix of cedar and dust. Underneath, though, there was another scent. Faint. Metallic. I couldn't place it. The living room looked the same. The old clock ticking too loud. The photograph of my grandfather on the mantel, staring with the same stern eyes I remembered as a child. He'd been a quiet man, a church deacon, respected around town. But there was something about the house that had always felt unsettled, like it was holding its breath. We spent the day cleaning, opening boxes, deciding what to keep. I found a stack of letters tied with twine in a drawer. Most were from church members thanking him for his kindness. But one caught my eye. No name, no address, just a shaky line that read, "You can't keep him down there forever." Before I could ask about it, Aunt June called from the kitchen, "Elena, come help me with these boxes in the cellar." The basement door groaned as we opened it. The air that rushed out was cold and damp. I followed her down, the single bulb flickering above us. That's when I saw it, under the cellar steps, half hidden by stacked paint cans. A small door, about 4 feet high, sealed with old nails and a rusted iron cross hanging from a nail. "What's that?" I asked. Aunt June froze, eyes wide. "Leave it." "June?" I said, "Leave it." Her voice cracked, and for a second she looked terrified. "Your granddaddy told us never to touch that door. Never." When I pressed, she turned and climbed the stairs without another word. I was left staring at the door, the iron cross trembling slightly, as if it had caught a draft. That night, the house felt too quiet. Mom had gone to bed early, and Aunt June was sitting up in the kitchen chain-smoking like she used to when she was nervous. I stayed in the living room, flipping through Grandpa's old Bible. Whole pages were marked, underlined in red, especially verses about binding the wicked. I was drifting toward sleep when I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was rain. But the sound was too steady, deliberate. It came from below under the floorboards. I froze, listening. 3 slow taps, then silence. A pause, then 3 more. The house had always creaked at night, but this was different, rhythmic, purposeful. I crept toward the cellar door. The sound stopped, My hand hovered over the doorknob, heart pounding. Then, one sharp knock from beneath the stairs. I stumbled back. Aunt June appeared behind me, eyes bloodshot. "You heard it, didn't you?" "What is it?" I whispered. She shook her head. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could ask more, she reached past me and locked the cellar door, slipping the key into her pocket. "Some things are better left nailed shut," she said. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the tapping again. Softer, closer, almost patient. The next morning, Aunt June was gone. Her car, her purse, everything. Mom said she'd probably gone to town to clear her head, but something about the way she left didn't sit right with me. By noon, I couldn't stop thinking about that door. The way June's voice had trembled, the cross, the tapping. I told myself I'd just look, just to know what had everyone so scared. The hammer was easy to find. The nails, old and brittle, came loose with only a few hits. The cross fell to the dirt floor with a dull clang. When I pulled the small door open, the air that came out was cold and smelled of iron and damp earth. I shone my flashlight inside. The room was small, maybe 8 feet across. The walls were covered in yellowed paper. I thought it was wallpaper at first until I looked closer. They were drawings, crayon drawings, dozens of them. Each one of the same figure, a little boy with hollow eyes and a mouth that was just a black smudge. Some were old, the paper brittle, but others looked newer, fresher. My stomach turned when I saw the last one, pinned right at eye level, the crayon lines dark and sharp. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, was the date. Today's date. And in the drawing, the boy wasn't standing in the basement anymore. He was standing in our living room. I ran upstairs. The house was silent except for the old clock ticking. Mom was in the kitchen washing dishes. "Mom," I said, "who drew those pictures downstairs?" She looked confused. "What pictures?" I told her everything. She went pale halfway through. When I mentioned the drawings, she whispered, "He told us he buried it, years ago." "What did Grandpa bury?" She swallowed hard. "Your uncle." I blinked. "I don't have an uncle." "You did." Her voice broke. "He died before you were born. He wasn't right, said he heard things, saw things in the cellar. Your grandfather." She stopped. "He said the boy wasn't him anymore." Before I could ask more, the living room clock stopped ticking. A single thud echoed from beneath us, then another. The tapping was back, louder now, coming from the walls. The floorboards creaked. Mom's eyes widened. "He's awake," she whispered. That night I tried to leave. The car wouldn't start. The landline was dead. The only sound was that steady, hollow tapping that followed us from room to room. Mom sat by the fire, praying under her breath. "Your grandfather tried to contain it," she said. "It feeds on memory, on blood. He sealed that room for a reason." But I couldn't just sit there. Something in me needed to face it. Maybe it was fear, maybe defiance. When I went back to the cellar, the hidden door was open again. The drawings fluttered in a draft I couldn't feel. In the middle of the room stood a small figure. A boy, gray-skinned, eyes like hollow pits. He tilted his head and smiled. "You let me out," he said, voice thin as air. The next thing I remember is Mom's scream. When I woke, it was morning. The door was sealed again, the iron cross nailed in place. Mom was gone. Her car too. Only muddy footprints remained, leading from the cellar steps to the yard, and stopping at the edge of the woods. I left that day and never went back. But sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I hear tapping beneath the floorboards of my apartment. Slow, deliberate, waiting. Some secrets buried by our elders are not superstition. They're warnings written in silence. Curiosity without reverence turns the past into a doorway, and once opened, not everything that crosses through remembers how to leave. I never thought I'd end up as a lighthouse keeper. Not that I had much of a plan after college, just a string of temporary jobs and dead-end internships. But when the ad popped up online, lighthouse keeper needed, remote location, full room board, short-term contract, something about it clicked. Maybe it was the promise of isolation. Maybe it was the pay. Either way, I didn't hesitate. The lighthouse was perched on the edge of a cliff, where jagged rocks met the relentless Atlantic. The drive was longer than I expected, twisting through fog-shrouded roads that seemed to vanish behind me. When I finally arrived, the first thing I noticed was the wind, sharp, salty, and unyielding, and the gulls that screamed like broken alarms. The lighthouse itself was an old brick tower, whitewashed but streaked with rust and sea salt. The metal spiral staircase glinted like a serpent in the sun. Inside, the air was musty with old wood and salt. The kitchen smelled faintly of mildew, and I found the small bedroom I'd be staying in had a single bed and a dresser. As I unpacked, I noticed the attic hatch above the landing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I climbed the narrow ladder. There, covered in dust and cobwebs, was a leather-bound journal. The name inside the cover read, Arthur Halsey, 1997-2099. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. The entries were sporadic, messy, almost frantic. Halsey wrote about hearing voices over the waves, seeing lights in the water that weren't ships, and feeling a presence in the tower that wasn't human. At first, I laughed softly. Isolation does that to people, I told myself. But there was something in his handwriting, the way the words slanted and tightened at the margins, that made me uneasy. The first night, I ate cold beans from a can and tried to settle in. The wind howled outside, shaking the shutters, and the waves slapped violently against the cliff. Around midnight, the foghorn sounded. At first, I thought it was a mechanical fault, but then it seemed different, irregular, like it was answering someone or something. My stomach tightened when I heard it, faint rhythmic tapping on the metal stairs above. I froze. "Hello?" I called, voice shaking. Nothing, just the wind. I didn't sleep well. Dreams came in waves of cold, choking water. I saw faces beneath the surface, sailors calling my name, mouths open, eyes wide, pleading. I woke, drenched in sweat, the journal open on my desk. The previous keeper's last entry read, "Do not follow the light. It waits. It chooses." I shivered. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to tell myself it was imagination. But the ocean below the cliff seemed alive, almost impatient, like it was watching me. By morning, I'd convinced myself the tapping was just metal shifting in the wind. But even as I walked to the cliff edge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next few days were routine, cleaning the lamp room, checking the light, and keeping the logs up to date. At first, the monotony was comforting. I'd sit on the balcony with my coffee, staring at the fog rolling over the sea, thinking isolation might be a good thing. But then the noises started. Small things at first. A door creaking open that I hadn't touched, the faint smell of salt and something burnt, objects slightly out of place. My rational mind tried to explain it. Drafts, loose fixtures, fatigue. But deep down, I knew something was off. One evening, I heard footsteps ascending the spiral staircase. I wasn't supposed to be alone. The lighthouse was empty. "Hello?" I shouted, gripping the railing. Silence. Then the foghorn. Its low wail came in sync with the steps, deliberate, mocking. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave, to drive straight back into town, but the road was miles away, and the fog made even walking dangerous. I opened the journal again. Arthur's entries were more frantic now, describing dreams of drowning sailors and figures moving across the water at night. He wrote about seeing the beam of the lighthouse catch them, reflecting in ways that defied physics. "The light chooses. It's he had scrawled in jagged handwriting. I tried to dismiss it. It's just old sea tales, nonsense to pass the long nights. But that night, as I climbed to check the lamp room, I froze. There, reflected in the lens, were figures walking on the water. Shadows, indistinct, humanoid, and somehow shimmering. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they didn't disappear. I stumbled back into the stairwell, heart pounding, and knocked over a bucket. The echoes didn't sound like mine. They sounded deeper, hollow, as if the stairs themselves were responding. I considered leaving, packing up, calling someone to come get me. But as I held the journal, the last page whispered to me, "It waits for the next keeper." I didn't understand, not yet. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the sea called me, a chorus of drowned voices, whispering my name. I'd wake to see the journal open, pages flipping as if the wind itself was turning them, words appearing that I hadn't written. It sees you. It waits. Don't follow the light. I tried to reach out to the town. The nearest neighbor was a fisherman named McAllister. I walked down the cliff path soaked to the bone and knocked on his door. He answered, squinting at me. "You okay, boy?" he asked. I hear things at the lighthouse, voices, lights on the water." He froze, expression tight. "You leave that place alone at night. Keepers, they don't last, not the ones who hear it. You've been warned, son." I walked back, heart pounding. His words echoed in my mind. I wanted to laugh, to tell myself he was just a superstitious old man. But when I climbed the lighthouse that night, the floorboards groaned under invisible weight. I saw the figures again, closer this time, moving silently across the waves, their faces pale and expressionless. The light of the lens followed them, though I hadn't turned it on. I ran to the lamp room and tried to shut it off, but the beam moved on its own, sweeping the horizon, and the foghorn bellowed in rhythm with knocking on the stairs. I realized the truth. The journal wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy. The next weeks blurred. Isolation gnawed at me, and reality itself felt fragile. Objects moved while I wasn't looking. The waves below the cliff roared like living beasts, and at night, the figures became more distinct, sailors trapped in some liminal space between life and death. One stormy night, I couldn't resist the call any longer. The wind tore at my coat, rain stinging my face, but I followed the light. Each step outside seemed to pull me closer, like gravity had changed, like the sea itself wanted me. I didn't see the figures. They were all around me, on the water, in the fog, everywhere, but I heard them whisper. "It's time." My foot slipped on wet rocks. The waves surged. I felt hands, icy and intangible, dragging me toward the ocean. I struggled, but the pull was inexorable. I thought of the journal, open on the desk. The next keeper is here. I understood in the cold clarity of terror that I had become part of the chain. I woke on the shore, or thought I did. The lighthouse loomed above me, silent and patient. The journal lay on the desk, open to a blank page. I touched it. Words appeared instantly. The next keeper is here. I staggered backward, realizing my fate. There was no escape. I returned to the lighthouse the following day, though I was different. Less me, more shadowed by the presence that had chosen me. The townfolk avoided me now. McAllister shook his head in quiet resignation when he saw me. The lighthouse waited, and the sea whispered just beneath hearing, promising the next visitor, the next story, the next soul. Some warnings are not given lightly, and some fates are inherited. I had ignored both. Isolation magnifies fear, and obsession blinds reason. Some warnings are not meant to be tested, and some places are not meant to be tamed. Respect history, heed caution, and understand that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be survived. I never thought much about Aunt May. My mother would mention her once in a while, always carefully, like she was trying to frame May in a soft, acceptable light. "She's eccentric," she'd say, "and lives far away for her health." That was it. I didn't ask questions. Eccentric was something you could shrug off, especially when it came to family you hardly saw. I was 29 when my mother called to tell me May had passed. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Jordan, May's gone. We need to settle her things." I drove to the care home without much thought, expecting to find an unfamiliar town at the edge of nowhere. Instead, it was just 2 towns over. I blinked at the address, unsure if my memory had betrayed me all these years. The care home looked like a relic from another era, brick walls stained by decades of rain, ivy climbing the sides in uneven strands, the front lawn uneven and patchy. I parked my car and walked to the front desk. The nurse behind the counter was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, clipboard in hand. "Are you Mr. Jordan Cole?" she asked. "Yes, I'm here for Aunt May," I said. "We've boxed up her belongings. There's also something for your mother, letters." She handed me a small, unassuming cardboard box, its edges frayed. She asked us to make sure these were sent. I nodded, taking the box. Inside were stacks of letters, all neatly addressed to my mother, postmarked once every month for the past 15 years. Curiosity prickled at my skin. I flipped open the top envelope and froze. The letters weren't the usual thinking of you type. Each contained drawings, sketches of a little girl with bright red hair, always staring straight ahead, sometimes smiling, sometimes reaching out toward the viewer. At the bottom, scrawled in careful, almost childish handwriting, each one said the same thing: "Your daughter still visits me at night." I laughed nervously, my voice trembling. This is strange." The nurse looked at me expectantly. "She wanted your mother to know. That's all I can tell you." I left the care home with the letters in my arms, heart pounding. Questions swirled in my mind. My mother never had a sister with red hair. She only had me. I couldn't understand the meaning behind these notes, and yet there was a pull to them, an unease that settled in my chest like a stone. That night, I put the letters in a drawer and tried to forget. But as I lay down, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange chill. Something about the drawings lingered in my mind, their little red-haired eyes seeming to follow me. The next morning I called my mother. She sounded hesitant, her voice brittle, like the sound of old porcelain tapping together. "Mom, I found Aunt May's letters. They're strange." She stiffened. "What letters?" I described them, the drawings, the repeated message. There was a pause, and I could hear her swallowing hard. "Where did you—" "The care home. She sent them every month for 15 years. She paled, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your sister." "She did." "Wait, what?" I couldn't mask my confusion. "Mom, you never had a daughter with red hair." Her hands trembled on the phone. "She existed. Before you were born, I had a daughter. She didn't make it. May kept her close. She didn't let her memory die." My chest tightened. I couldn't think straight. My mother rarely cried, and yet I could hear her voice quiver like the entire truth had been held back for decades. "Jordan, I'm sorry I never told you. I thought it would be easier to forget. Easier for everyone." I didn't know what to say. The idea of a sister I never knew, whose existence had been quietly maintained in letters, was almost too much to process. But there was more than that. There was the implication that she was still present, somehow, watching. That night I slept fitfully, the letters on the nightstand. Around 2 a.m, I felt a light touch on my pillow. I jolted upright. There, lying beside me, was a single crayon, bright red. My heart stopped. I picked it up with trembling fingers. There was no explanation, no logical way it could have ended up there. And yet, I knew, deep in my bones, that May hadn't been exaggerating. That little girl, my sister, had never really left. After that night, things escalated. At first it was small, a whisper in the kitchen when I was alone. The sensation of someone standing behind me in the living room just out of sight. Shadows that didn't belong, moving in the corners of my eyes. I told myself it was grief, the weight of discovering a secret I had never been prepared for. But the red crayon began appearing in strange places. On the floor, tucked between books, even once balanced on the edge of my bathroom sink. Always pristine, always new. I started talking to her aloud. I don't know what you want, okay? I'm Jordan. One night, I dreamt of her clearly for the first time. The little girl with red hair was standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. You didn't know me, she whispered, voice like a breeze over dry leaves. But I know you. You're mine too. I woke in a sweat. The crayon was in my hand. I hadn't moved. It was impossible. I wanted to tell my mother, but I feared her reaction. If she had kept this hidden for so long, was it something she wanted to protect me from, or something she feared herself? A week later, I drove to my mother's house. The letters were still with me, now more numerous as I had collected every single one from the care home. She greeted me cautiously, eyes downcast. I held up the box. Mom, I need answers. Who was she? What's happening? She sighed, motioning for me to sit. Her name was Lily, she began, voice cracking. You were supposed to be the only child, but Lily, she didn't survive. May. She took care of her, wrote to me, kept her memory alive, and sometimes she doesn't leave. Sometimes she visits those she loved. I wanted to ask how, wanted to demand proof, wanted to rationalize everything. But there was a pause, heavy and quiet, and then I noticed it. A faint scratch mark on the edge of the table in a pattern that looked like handwriting. I swallowed. You're saying she's here? I don't know, my mother whispered. Sometimes love isn't enough to let go. After that, I returned home with the letters and the lingering sense that someone was watching. Days passed, the crayon appearing in unexpected places. At first, fear gripped me, but eventually, I began to accept it. This was Lily, my sister, a presence tied to me in ways I couldn't yet understand. I left her drawings on the nightstand, read the letters aloud. Sometimes I whispered back to her. Sometimes I drew her into the stories, imagining her life alongside mine. It didn't feel like haunting anymore. It felt like connection. Though I never saw her fully, her presence became part of my routine. A reminder that some bonds transcend death, that love can linger in ways we cannot measure. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I would find a crayon on my pillow, and I would smile. Love and loss can leave unseen marks, and the past we try to bury often lingers in unexpected ways. Secrets kept to protect can instead shape the future. Sometimes we must acknowledge the presence of those we cannot see, honoring memory and connection rather than ignoring it, because love, once planted, never truly dies. I didn't think I'd ever care about apartment aesthetics. I was a 28-year-old graphic designer, used to cramped spaces, old buildings, and neighbors who banged on the walls for fun. But the first time I walked down the hallway of my new apartment, my breath caught. There it was, a bright red door, bold and out of place against the peeling beige paint and faded carpeting. The leasing agent shrugged when I asked about it. Oh, that? Just storage. No one uses it. Tenants usually cover it up. And cover it up they had. Paintings leaned against it. Landscapes, abstract swirls, faces frozen mid-scream. I could see the edge of the red beneath the bottom painting. Something about it pulled at me, the color like a warning or a beckoning. That night I unpacked my boxes trying to ignore it. But around midnight, I thought I heard something. A faint scuffling, like someone moving across the other side of the door. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. Heart thudding, I convinced myself it was the old pipes, or maybe the building settling. The next morning I noticed something strange. One of the paintings had shifted. It had been a simple landscape yesterday, but now a face appeared in the background, wide-eyed and terrified. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of light. But then another painting, a serene cityscape, had new eyes, staring out from the canvas. I moved the paintings back, trying to cover the door fully. But that night the shuffling returned, louder. And now I could swear the air around it smelled strange, damp clay, and something coppery, like blood. I recoiled, moving away from the door, and yet couldn't stop glancing at it. Over the next few days, the paintings continued to shift on their own. Faces multiplied, sometimes overlapping the original art. Sometimes they looked angry, sometimes terrified, sometimes familiar. I started taking photos, documenting the changes, thinking I could rationalize them later. Maybe someone was sneaking into the apartment while I was at work. Maybe I was losing my mind. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Larkin, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a thin smile. "Red door?" she said immediately. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't mess with that." "What do you mean? It's just storage." Her smile faded. "It's not storage. No one knows what's behind it. No one. Just leave it alone. Don't open it. Don't even look too long." Her warning chilled me, but I didn't listen. I painted over the new faces one night, determined to reclaim the space in front of the door. Thick coats of beige covered the terrified expressions. I went to bed feeling triumphant. At 2 a.m. I woke to whispering. My name, soft and familiar, echoed in the hallway. I sat up, straining to hear. "Sophie, come inside." It sounded like my mother's voice. I froze, tears pricking my eyes. The air smelled worse now, wet clay and blood stronger than before. The whispering repeated, looping my name in that same soft, coaxing tone. The next morning I noticed new faces drawn over the paint I had just applied. They were smaller now, less detailed but unmistakable. Tiny figures reaching out from the wall, their mouths open in silent screams. The weeks blurred. I tried ignoring the red door. I avoided that hallway when possible. I slept with the bedroom door locked. Yet every night, the whispers came back. Sometimes my mother's voice, sometimes laughter I hadn't heard in years, echoing from a corner of the hallway as if I were a child again. I decided I had to see what was inside. One evening, I moved the last of the paintings and hesitated at the threshold. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. The air was colder here, heavier, almost sticky. I took a deep breath. "It's just storage," I whispered to myself. "It's nothing." I turned the knob and opened the door. The room inside was empty, bare walls, dust-covered floor, nothing. And yet, the sound hit me immediately. The laughter of my childhood, playful and bright, echoing off the walls. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The whispers came again, stronger, more intimate. "Sophie, come inside. It's okay." I slammed the door, shaking. I told myself I would leave it alone, that I wouldn't let it get to me. But I couldn't forget the feeling of being watched, of being beckoned into something I couldn't resist. The room wanted me, and somehow I knew it always had. I couldn't sleep. My work suffered. The whispers followed me, soft but persistent. Even when I was in the kitchen, in the shower, brushing my teeth. They became part of my life. I knew I couldn't stay. I gave my notice, packed my things, and moved out. I left the apartment quickly, never looking back. The red door seemed to haunt my memory even as I drove away. Weeks later, I had to return to collect a few leftover items. The building was quiet. I walked the hallway, heart heavy, but the door was gone. Where it had been was now a blank wall, beige and unremarkable. My pulse slowed, relief washing over me, until I felt it. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible, curling through the air. "Sophie, come inside." The whisper followed me everywhere. In my new apartment, I could hear it late at night, teasing, coaxing, a soft reminder of that red door in the room that had wanted me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to rationalize it as stress, memory, imagination. But eventually I stopped fighting. I began leaving a small lamp on in the hallway, speaking softly to the whispers. Sometimes I would laugh at them, sometimes hum back, pretending they were echoes of my own mind. Over time, the whispers lost their edge of fear. They became almost comforting, a strange reminder that some places, some memories, refuse to be forgotten. The red door may be gone, but the room behind it, the echoes of my childhood, and the voice that called me by name remained. I realized something. Some doors, some pasts, cannot be closed. They follow you, shaping your nights and your mind, reminding you of what you cannot forget. And sometimes that's not entirely a bad thing. Some parts of our past refuse to stay hidden, no matter how much we try to ignore them. Fear grows when we resist what we cannot control, but acceptance, acknowledging memories, voices, and shadows, allows us to live with them rather than be consumed. Not all doors are meant to be opened, yet some must be faced to understand who we truly are. When I was a kid, the river was our escape. My dad and I would spend long summer afternoons down by the bend that cut through our family land in West Virginia, its water slow and glinting like mercury under the sun. He taught me to fish, to skim stones across the water, to spot the signs of wildlife, a broken branch, a disturbed patch of dirt, a rustle in the bushes that meant something had just passed. But there was one part of the trail he always stopped at, a massive old oak whose branches clawed toward the sky. "Don't touch it," he warned once, his eyes narrowing as we passed. "And don't talk. This is where your granddad rests." I remember staring at the trunk, running my fingers along the deep grooves of bark, noticing the chains embedded in it. They looked old, rusted, and unnatural, as though they had grown into the tree. "Dad, why chains?" I'd asked. He shook his head. "Some things you don't ask. Just remember, respect where people lie, even if it ain't official." Grandpa had gone missing when my dad was about 8. No one ever found a body. The stories my dad's family told were half-whispered and mostly avoided. Some said he'd drowned in the river. Others claimed he'd walked off into the mountains one night and never returned. My dad never talked much about it, except that the oak marked the place he thought of as a grave. Years later, when I was 17, the curiosity gnawed at me too hard to ignore. I wanted to see it for myself, to understand why the chains were there, why my father's face tightened whenever the tree came into view. So one summer, I took my backpack, a small tent, and a flashlight and hiked down the old trail by myself. The sun dipped low behind the mountains by the time I set up camp. I lit a small fire and ate the canned beans I had packed, listening to the river murmur like it carried secrets it wasn't willing to share. As darkness swallowed the trail, I realized how alone I was. No hum of insects, no rustle of deer, just the soft, steady whisper of the river. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, the memory of chains scraping against bark. Around 2 a.m, I woke to the faintest sound, something dragging across the grass. My heart thumped, and I told myself it was probably a raccoon or an old branch falling, but then I heard it again. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of chains. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. There, under the oak, was a figure, tall, pale, wet as though it had risen from the river itself. Its eyes were black pools reflecting nothing but darkness. I froze, unable to scream, unable to move. The air smelled of damp earth and something older, something rotten. And then it just stood there, as if waiting. By morning, the figure was gone. But the ground where it had stood was torn, clawed up like something had fought to get out or in. I packed up my gear quickly, my hands trembling, and walked back up the trail. When I got home, I told my dad only that I had slept under the tree. He didn't ask about the chains. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head and said, "We don't go fishing there anymore." I didn't know it then, but that night would change how I viewed the river forever. I couldn't shake the image of the oak or the figure beneath it. Every night afterward, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for noises outside my window. My friends laughed when I told them I wanted to hike back down there, said I was imagining things. But the river called to me like a whisper in the dark, dragging me back toward that stretch of land where the past lingered like fog. A few weeks later, my dad agreed, reluctantly, to take me fishing again. "Just don't linger near the tree," he warned. "It's not safe." I nodded, though I couldn't help but feel a thrill. The trail smelled different that day, damp from an early rain. We made small talk as we walked, but I noticed him glancing at the oak often, his jaw tight. When we got to the river, the water shimmered in the late afternoon sun. I cast my line, trying to distract myself from the memory of that figure. "Ever feel like the past just sticks around?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, his eyes scanning the river's edge. "Sometimes," he said, "but it don't bother me much. Best to let some things lie." I frowned. "You mean Granddad?" Dad didn't answer at first. Then he muttered, He never came back, and maybe that's a mercy." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the black-eyed figure, the chains, the clawed ground. I made a decision. I had to see it for myself, alone. Maybe if I understood what had happened to Grandpa, I could finally stop fearing the oak. I packed my tent and gear again and hiked down the trail under a crescent moon. The river whispered to me as I walked, water slapping against stones. By the time I reached the oak, I felt a strange energy in the air, like the world had thinned and left a cold space where reality should have been. I set up my tent a few yards away, my heart pounding with anticipation and terror. Around 2 a.m., I woke, chains dragging. My flashlight trembling in my hand, I saw it again. The figure, eyes black as river water, standing beneath the oak. This time, I couldn't look away. I stepped closer. "Grandpa?" My voice trembled. The figure tilted its head. A low, gurgling sound rose from its throat. The chains dragged closer, scraping the earth. The river behind it seemed to churn, rising unnaturally. But when I blinked, everything looked normal, except the ground where it had been, clawed open again. I stumbled back into the tent, heart hammering, and whispered to myself, I can't. I have to leave." By dawn, I packed up, my hands shaking. When I told my dad I'd gone alone, his face turned pale. "I said don't go near it," he snapped. "Some things you don't mess with, son." But the pull of the oak, the river, and whatever had taken my grandfather refused to let me forget. I couldn't stop thinking about that oak. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale figure, the black eyes staring at me. I started asking my dad more questions about Grandpa, hoping he would finally tell me something I didn't already know. "Did he ever say anything before he disappeared?" I asked one evening while we were sitting on the porch, the smell of rain on the grass filling the air. Dad shook his head, looking out over the river. "He was a quiet man, but he liked to wander. Sometimes he'd go fishing, sometimes he'd just walk into the woods and come back hours later. Or he wouldn't. Never did explain why he liked that part of the river either." I pressed further. "What about the oak?" Dad's hand twitched at the edge of the railing. "It's not the tree itself. It's what happened there. Chains. Men. It's a long story, and some of it ain't meant for kids. You were always too young to understand." I didn't push, but that night, curiosity gnawed at me again. I borrowed some old family journals from the attic, yellowed and brittle, hoping for answers. That's when I found a letter tucked into one of the volumes, written by my grandfather himself. "The river knows what we cannot. The oak remembers those it has claimed, and I fear I've angered it. If you read this, leave it be. Some things once disturbed cannot rest." My stomach dropped. Grandpa had known. He had known and still gone. And the chains in the tree? They weren't random marks. They were a warning. A week later, I returned to the river, determined to record whatever was happening there. I set up a small camera near the oak and waited, hiding behind a bush. Hours passed in silence. the river gurgling lazily over rocks. Then around 2 a.m. I heard it, chains dragging. The figure emerged slowly, black-eyed and dripping, moving in a rhythm almost human but not quite. I froze. It paused beneath the oak and looked directly at the camera, or at me. I couldn't tell. My fingers trembled over the recorder, trying not to make a sound. Then it knelt by the clawed earth and traced its long, wet fingers through the dirt as if digging or marking something. I ran, not just from the river but from whatever I had awakened. By the time I made it home, I was gasping, soaked in sweat, and convinced of one thing. Grandpa hadn't just disappeared. Whatever lived by that oak had claimed him, and now it was bound to the river, bound to the chains, bound to anyone who dared disturb its memory. The summer was ending, but I couldn't stay away from the river. I became obsessed, sneaking out in the middle of the night, taking notes, sketching the patterns of the chains in the bark, the claw marks in the soil. Each night the figure appeared, and each night I felt my sense of time slipping. I decided I needed help. I called my friend Marcus, who had grown up in the same county, knew the rivers and forests, and had a skeptical mind. "I'm telling you, Marcus," I said one night in my room, spreading out photos and sketches. "There's something there. Something tied to the oak. I saw it with my own eyes. I can't explain it, but it's real." He laughed nervously. "You've been reading too many ghost stories, man. You're letting your imagination run wild." "I swear it's not imagination. Look at this." I showed him a recording of the chains scraping the earth. The low, wet sound sent a chill down his spine. Against his better judgment, Marcus agreed to come with me. That night, armed with flashlights and cameras, we hiked down the trail. The river's surface glimmered in the moonlight, the air smelling damp and electric. We set up near the oak and waited. Hours passed. Around 2 a.m., we heard it. The dragging of chains, slow and deliberate. I gripped Marcus's shoulder. "Stay calm," I whispered. The figure emerged, pale and wet, its eyes black as the river. Marcus froze, mouth open. It moved toward us, then paused at the oak, as if acknowledging our intrusion. Then something impossible happened. It raised a hand toward me. A voice, gurgling and broken, barely audible, whispered, "Leave, or join." I didn't need translation. My stomach turned. I grabbed Marcus and we ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, the chains scraping behind us until we burst out onto the main trail. We didn't stop until we reached my car. Neither of us spoke for a long time, but the lesson was clear. Some things, no matter how much curiosity gnaws at you, are meant to remain undisturbed. Weeks passed. I stopped going to the river. Marcus didn't come back with me. My dad never asked why I had returned so pale and shaken. I told him only that I had explored enough, that I understood. One late afternoon, I returned to the river one last time, fully in daylight, to see the oak in all its weathered, silent glory. The chains were still embedded in the bark, the clawed earth beneath it dry and still. I didn't set up cameras, I didn't linger, I just stood there listening to the water, the wind, and the distant rustle of leaves. For the first time, I felt at peace. Grandpa's story, the chains, the black-eyed figure, they were all part of something I couldn't control, and trying to control it had nearly cost me my sanity. The past was theirs, not mine, and some doors once closed must remain closed. I walked away, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. The river flowed as if nothing had happened, the oak towering over everything quietly, eternally, guarding its secrets. I never went fishing there again, and I never forgot the lesson that had nearly cost me my life. Some mysteries, no matter how tempting, are not meant to be solved. Curiosity can lead to knowledge, but it can also lead to danger. Respect the past, respect those who came before, and recognize the boundaries between life and death. Some doors once opened can never be closed again. When my father passed, I didn't expect much from his belongings. He'd been a quiet man, a man of habits, more interested in fixing old radios and keeping meticulous notes about the weather than in family drama. But among his papers and odd knickknacks, I found a small battered shoebox tucked in the back of his closet. No label, nothing fancy, just a plain cardboard box with a faded lid. Curiosity got the better of me. I carried it into the living room, set it on the coffee table, and lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of photographs, mostly black and white, most of them from the 1960s and 1970s. Birthdays, cookouts, holidays, the kind of family snapshots that always look happier than you remember. I flipped through them slowly. There were pictures of my dad as a child, his siblings, my mother, and even some distant relatives I didn't recognize. But then I noticed something odd. In almost every photograph, at the edges of the frame, standing just out of focus, was a woman. At first I thought she was a neighbor, or maybe a friend of the family who had wandered into the frame without realizing it. But the more photos I looked at, the stranger it became. She was always there, always in the same pose. A soft smile, dark hair pulled back neatly, hands folded calmly in front of her. Sometimes she appeared behind a window, sometimes just standing behind a group of people, never interacting, never changing expression. I frowned. Dad never mentioned her, I muttered, flipping the pages faster. "Mom?" I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but tired. "Hi, honey. Everything okay?" "Mom, do you recognize this woman?" I asked, holding a photo up to the phone, though she couldn't see it. There was a pause. A long, uneasy pause. "No, I don't," she said finally. "I don't think she was in our family." "Why?" I don't know. She's in a lot of pictures everywhere. And it's weird. She doesn't seem to age." Mom sighed. "I suppose some people just happen to show up in photos. That's all." I wasn't satisfied. Something about her gaze, the way her eyes seemed to follow the camera, felt off. Over the next few days, I took the photos out one by one, scanning them carefully. The more I looked, the more impossible it seemed. Same dress, same expression, same posture. It was like she existed in a loop, frozen in time while the world changed around her. Then, late one evening, I showed one of the photos to my Aunt Marge. She was sorting through some old things in her attic and let me pull her away for a closer look. Her eyes widened and she went pale. That's your grandmother's sister," she whispered, her hands trembling. She died before your dad was even born." I froze. "Wait, what?" "She was sick," Aunt Marge said, voice barely audible. "We all thought she was gone for good. No one expected her to appear. Well, anywhere. But that's her. That's her face." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd stared at hundreds of pictures without realizing what I was seeing. I wanted to laugh it off, to say it was coincidence, but the truth gnawed at me. The woman in the photographs was impossible. That night I left the shoebox on the kitchen table while I went to grab a glass of water. When I returned, my heart nearly stopped. There, in front of the box, was a single photograph. It wasn't old. It wasn't faded. It was freshly printed. And in that photo, the woman was standing behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. I left the photograph on the table, staring at it for hours. The woman's gaze seemed alive, unnervingly precise, as if she knew I was watching her in real time. My mind refused to accept it, but my chest tightened with every thought. By morning, the sun streaming through the kitchen window did little to ease my nerves. I grabbed my father's camera from the attic, one of those old SLRs he never used, and started taking pictures around the house. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen. Everywhere I turned, I tried to catch anything unusual. When I developed the first roll, my stomach sank. The woman was there, not just in the corners of my photographs, but sometimes behind furniture, behind the glass of a door, or reflected faintly in a mirror. I tried rationalizing it, shadows, tricks of the light, double exposures. But there was a consistency, a precision in her presence that no accident could explain. I called Aunt Marge again. She's still here," I whispered. "She's in every photo I take." Aunt Marge's voice was brittle. Don't provoke her. Some things linger, some people, they don't want to be forgotten." I didn't understand. How could someone who had died decades ago still manifest in photographs? I spent days going through every box in my parents' house, hoping to find a clue. Letters, diaries, anything. I found scraps of old correspondence between my grandmother and her sister, but nothing hinted at why she would appear so persistently. One evening, I noticed a pattern. The woman's gaze always pointed toward the next place I would look. In the old birthday photos, her eyes followed me to a chair I would sit in. In a cookout photograph, her eyes were directed toward the kitchen doorway, where the last photograph had appeared. That's when I started to feel watched. At first subtle, the hair on my arms rising, a chill in my spine. Then more tangible, doors creaking open, lights flickering, the faint smell of lavender. The same scent I imagined in the photographs, as though her presence had a memory of it. I couldn't ignore it. I had to understand her. And that meant confronting what the photographs were trying to tell me, and what I might see when I stopped running from the truth. I set up a workspace in the kitchen, laying out all the photographs, journals, and letters. I wanted to find a connection, a logic. Every night, the freshly printed photo would appear somewhere in the house, on the kitchen table, on my nightstand, sometimes tucked into the pages of a book I hadn't opened in years. I started talking to her, whispering into the darkness, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement. "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing. Just the silence of the house, the faint flicker of light from the street outside. A week later, I invited my cousin Helen over. She was skeptical, but had always been curious about the family lore. When I showed her a collection of the photographs, she gasped. That's Aunt Lillian," she said. "Grandma's sister. She died before Dad was born, but there were always rumors. People said she was strange, never fit in, always watching. They said she couldn't let go." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Could it be possible that a lingering attachment, a fixation on the living, could anchor her to this world? That night, I set up a camera in my bedroom, hoping to catch something. Hours later, I saw her. Just a faint shadow at first, the silhouette of a woman standing by the window. Then clearer. Her face, soft, unchanging, eyes fixed on me. I froze, my hands trembling. It was impossible. And yet, there she was, the very woman who had appeared in every photograph, her presence undeniable. I started feeling her when I was awake, too. The scent of lavender in the hallway, the weight of a gaze at my shoulder, books falling off shelves without explanation. It wasn't malevolent, not exactly, but it was persistent, pressing. I researched obsessively, reading about spirits, hauntings, attachments, people who couldn't leave, people tethered to the living by memory. And the more I read, the more the story fit. She had been alive once, but she hadn't been remembered properly. And memory, I realized, could hold a soul in place. One night I spoke to her again. "You're my grandmother's sister, right? Do you need me to remember you?" The next morning, a photograph appeared on my counter. I froze. She was smiling, but this time, not just at the camera, at me. And in the background, there was a single word, faintly scrawled on the wall of the photo. "Thank you." I didn't need another sign. She wasn't here to harm me. She just wanted to exist, to be seen, to be remembered. I spent the next weeks carefully going through the old family albums, annotating each photograph, writing names, dates, and memories in the margins. Each time I acknowledged her presence, she appeared less abruptly, more gently. It was like she was slowly being allowed to rest. The last photograph appeared one evening, placed neatly on my desk. She was standing behind me, just as before, but her smile was softer. When I looked at her eyes, I felt peace instead of fear. I whispered, "I see you. You're remembered now." The presence faded. The lavender scent vanished. The house felt empty, but no longer oppressive. She had finally crossed over, not through fear, not through force, but through memory and acknowledgement. It was then I realized the truth. Remembering someone, honoring them, can be a powerful act. It can tether the living and the dead in ways the heart understands before the mind does. Some souls linger not out of malice, but because they have been forgotten. Memory and acknowledgement can be a bridge between life and death. And remembering those who came before us is not just an act of respect, it is an act of love. Neglecting memory can leave emptiness, but acknowledgement can bring peace. I had always loved the quiet that came with winter in Cedar Ridge, Wisconsin. The soft falling snow outside, the smell of wood polish mixed with the faint aroma of coffee, and the way the house seemed to hum softly from the heater. It all felt peaceful. But that Tuesday afternoon in February, I learned just how fragile that peace could be. I had just returned from work early. The week had been brutal, full of client deadlines that seemed impossible to meet. My partner, Alex, had gone to pick up groceries, leaving me alone in our 2-story suburban house. The streets were empty, neighbors buried in snow, kids at school. The house was mine, or so I thought. I kicked off my boots, brushed snow off my jacket, and inhaled the comforting smells of home. For a moment, I let myself relax. Then I heard it, a thud, upstairs. My hand froze on the railing. Footsteps, a box dropped. Probably nothing. The house creaks, I told myself. Probably just the upstairs closet door settling, I muttered aloud. The sound came again, heavier, more deliberate, from the guest bedroom. My stomach tightened. Weird, I said, brow furrowed. Alex better not have left a box up there. I tried to shake it off. I poured myself a cup of tea, tried to focus on the warmth in my hands, but the quiet of the house was too still, too deliberate. Every small sound, every creak of the floors, seemed amplified. I went to the pantry to grab a mug, and that's when I noticed it. A row of canned goods had shifted slightly. A box leaned where it hadn't before. I froze. Huh. Did I do that? I whispered to myself. Probably absent-mindedness. I tried to convince myself of that, but the feeling lingered. Someone else could be here. By late afternoon, I was pacing the living room, glancing at the stairs. Every thud upstairs made my pulse jump. By evening, the snow outside had thickened, leaving the house feeling smaller, more isolated. When the thuds resumed, deliberate pacing, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I pressed myself against the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening. The faint hum of the heater, the wind rattling the windows, and the steady fall of snow outside were no longer comforting. They were masking something else, something moving silently upstairs. It was around 7:35 p.m. when I heard the click. The spare bedroom door, the one Alex usually locked from the inside, was now locked from the other side. My hands went cold. No, that's impossible, I whispered. My pulse raced. I backed away slowly from the stairs. The logical part of my brain told me it was a mistake, maybe a malfunction with the lock. But every instinct screamed that it wasn't. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. "Someone's in my house," I gasped. "I don't know how long they've been here, but please, send someone." The operator's calm voice did little to soothe me. I could barely speak over the pounding of my own heart. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of snow crunching outside made my ears strain for any other sound inside the house. When the police arrived, I was in the kitchen, gripping a mug like a lifeline, heart hammering. 2 officers swept the house while I stayed behind, watching every corner of the room. They returned a few minutes later, one holding the key to the spare bedroom. Inside, pressed into the far corner, were grocery bags, a blanket, and scattered personal items. Someone had been living there and silently, carefully, moving only when I wasn't around, for at least 2 days. Jesus, I muttered. Someone stayed here? Upstairs? Yes, one officer said. They probably entered through an unlocked window or basement, kept themselves hidden, mostly at night. Everything clicked into place. The thuds, the creaks, the sense of being watched. I felt violated in a way I couldn't have imagined. My home, the place I should have felt safest, had been compromised. Alex returned around 8:30 p.m., groceries in hand, and froze when I explained what had happened. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, but also the immediate concern. We walked through the house together while the officers documented everything. The spare bedroom, the attic, even the pantry. Everything had been searched. No signs of the intruder remained, just subtle evidence that they had been very careful. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. They had been invisible, leaving only traces in the corners of the home. "We've seen this before," one officer said. "People like this, they know how to move quietly. They hide. Sometimes they even try to become part of the house for a while." I shivered. The thought of someone living silently above me while I went about my daily life made my stomach turn. I could almost imagine their eyes following me, even now, even in their absence. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, checking the spare bedroom door over and over. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the heater, sounded like footsteps to my jittered mind. Bruno stayed at my side, sensing my fear and offering the only comfort I had. Days turned into weeks, but the psychological impact lingered. I noticed every sound, the shift of furniture, the slam of a window, the scratching of snow against the siding, and jumped at every unfamiliar noise. Alex helped, reinforcing locks, installing cameras, adding motion sensors. But even with these measures, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone had been in my house, moving around silently, knowing the layout, watching, waiting. I began sleeping in the living room, closer to the cameras, the dog at my feet. Every night, every creak, every shift in the air reminded me. My home had been penetrated. My sanctuary had been infiltrated. And although the intruder was gone, the fear they planted remained. Eventually, I learned to live with the knowledge. The house felt mine again, but differently. I paid attention in ways I never had before, checking locks, securing windows, knowing who had access. I learned that safety isn't guaranteed. It's maintained through vigilance. Even now, when the snow falls thick outside and the house grows quiet, I notice every sound, every shadow. I can't stop the memory entirely. But I also know that fear, when handled with awareness and preparation, can be a tool, not just a threat. The intruder was never caught. Some part of me always expects them to return. But another part of me has learned to be ready, to respect my instincts, to trust my judgment, and to take the small steps that keep me and my loved ones safe. True safety comes not from assuming the world is secure, but from respecting your instincts, preparing for the unexpected, and remaining vigilant. Fear, when acknowledged and addressed, can teach you awareness, caution, and resilience, rather than leaving you paralyzed.